Thank you for joining today's opening session. To start off with, it's my distinct privilege to present the Secretary of North Carolina's Department of Information Technology and State Chief Information Officer, Jim Weaver. Secretary Weaver joined the North Carolina Department of Information Technology in March of 2021 with more than 30 years of leadership and management in the IT industry. As Secretary and State Chief Information Officer, he leads the agency responsible for strategic IT planning and the procurement and delivery of IT services and solutions, as well as cybersecurity and efforts to expand broadband access and affordability across North Carolina. As Secretary Weaver chairs the North Carolina Information Technology Strategy Board and the North Carolina 911 Board. He also serves on several committees for NASCIO, the National Association for State Chief Information Officers, including its Executive and Broadband Advisory Group. He also co-chairs the Enterprise Architecture Committee for NASCIO. Mr. Secretary, the floor is all yours, sir.
Thank you, Rob. And I thought we were going to keep out the number of years because I have a hard time convincing folks I started when I was 7. So with that in mind, good morning, everybody. And again, thank you so much for joining us on day 2 of the North Carolina Cybersecurity Awareness Symposium. I hope you truly found yesterday's sessions to be informative and helpful. It was great hearing from so many of our partners, such as the North Carolina National Guard, and the work it's doing with local and state governments, as well as its role on the North Carolina Joint Cybersecurity Task Force. I'm a member of the North Carolina National Guard and proud to be part of the task force. It's a critical component in our whole of state approach to cybersecurity. As you know, government protects sensitive personal data from driver's licenses to electronic health records. In addition, digital transformation, hybrid working environments create numerous vulnerabilities. Small mistakes can provide opportunities for bad actors to cause great harm. And bad actors only have to be right once. We must be right all the time, and that's a heavy burden for us to continue to lift forward. We're bringing more government services online. We're hard at work at expanding reliable and affordable high-speed internet access to every part of the state for every North Carolinian. Cybersecurity must be at the foundation of all we do. We must stay alert and evolve. Both IT workers and end users need security user awareness training. Strong identity management both protects residents' privacy and helps thwart ransomware and other cyber attacks. My department can't do this alone. We need the collaboration of all state agencies, local governments, and our private partners. We've got a lot of talented people working here at North Carolina's Department of Information Technology and across the state that work every day to help keep our network safe and secure. But we need to expand the pool of skilled, talented, and importantly, diverse cyber professionals. As we all know, cybersecurity is a joint effort, and we couldn't do our jobs without partners like all of you doing yours. So again, a sincere thank you for all you do on a day-to-day basis. With that said, I'd like to now welcome our special guest this morning, retired Major General Brett T. Williams. General Williams is a co-founder of IronNet Cybersecurity. IronNet delivers the power of collective cybersecurity to defend companies, sectors, and nations. He served nearly 33 years in the U.S. Air Force, and his last assignment was Director of Operations, U.S. Cyber Command. In that position, he was responsible for the operations and defense of Department of Defense networks, as well as the planning and execution of offensive actions in support of national security objectives. General Williams is also a highly experienced fighter pilot with more than 100 combat missions in the F-15C model. In addition, he held several large operational commands to include Commander of the Air Force's largest combat wing, which is located in Okinawa, Japan, So General Williams, sir, welcome and thank you for your comments and joining us today.
Awesome. Well, Mr. Secretary, thank you for the introduction and thank you for the opportunity to engage the group this morning. So I will tell you all up front, I just want to reemphasize what Rob said. As we were talking before we came on the air, if you will, I would much rather talk about what you want to talk about, especially if it's not the same thing that I want to talk about. So I've got about 30 or 35 minutes of pre-planned material here, and hopefully that will just tee up some issues and give you all some things to think about. But I would really appreciate the engagement and the questions, and I would love to be able to interact in that way. So to get started, let me solve the technology problem. And Rob, if you could just confirm for me that the slides are showing, please.
They are showing.
Okay, awesome. All right. Well, one thing I learned in the Air Force is the best way to do a presentation is to tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And I still kind of follow that process. So to let you know what I'm going to go through in the next few minutes here is I'm going to start with kind of a perspective of the threat, starting at the national security level. I think it's important for all of us as Americans to understand what that threat is and how it's increasing. And for those of you that had the opportunity to hear General Alexander yesterday, I'm sure he highlighted that as well. And then I will drill down in that a little bit in terms of how it applies, specifically to you and your business and some things you need to think about. And then we'll take that into the subject we want to talk about today, which is ransomware. And I'll give you a sneak peek into my pitch is that, a lot of people think ransomware just appears out of nowhere. It's magic. I open my computer, it's all encrypted, and somebody wants $500,000 in Bitcoin from me. That's not actually the way it happens. And when you understand how ransomware happens, there are things you can do to defend yourself against ransomware and give yourself a much better chance of being able to keep your business moving, to keep the state moving forward, to be able to deal with this situation. Because as General Nakasone, I saw a comment from him in the last couple of days, the commander of U.S. Cyber Command, the director of the NSA. He expects to be dealing with serious ransomware threats for at least the next 5 years. So this isn't going away because people make a lot of money from it. And so, and then at the end, I'll give you 4 or 5 things that you can think about for your business, some very basic things, kind of a checklist of things that, when you get done with the conference, you can go back and check and say, are these things we're doing or are these things we're thinking about? And then the last thing I'll say is that whenever I do these kind of presentations, I keep the language, the technical language, understandable for both non-technical business leaders and technical business leaders. And so for the non-technical business leaders, I've found since I got into cybersecurity that too many people that sit at the top of organizations, whether these are governmental organizations, military organizations, businesses, as I've seen in the last 7 years in the private sector, they don't understand enough about this cybersecurity issue. And it is a strategic issue, whether you're a government agency or a business. It's strategically important to understand. And you can't just delegate all of that to the CIO and the CISO and that sort of thing. You have to understand some of the concepts, some of the terms, because ultimately it's the people that run these organizations that are responsible for managing the risk. And so I will go into a little bit of technical today because for those folks that don't necessarily understand it, I want you to be a little bit conversant in it. And then for the flip side, for those technical leaders, I appreciate the shout out from Nathan Brown in the chat. Nathan reminded me that we worked together many years ago, back about 2004 or 5, down at the 33rd Fighter Wing at Eglin Air Force Base, Florida. And he went on to become an Air Force cyber operations officer. So for somebody like Nathan, what I'm trying to do is maybe give you some ideas on how you can communicate to those non-technical leaders you work with every day. And maybe you'll find something useful in terms of being able to, to really convey some things that we need to think about when we look at businesses and organizations holistically. Okay. So with that as a lead in case you couldn't see the sign behind me with this North Carolina audience, I wanted to make sure you understand where my allegiance is. So that's a picture of me, and that's a picture of my wife, Mary Ann, and you may recognize the Duke Blue Devil in the middle. But Mary Ann and I met here in Durham in ROTC, actually, at Duke. And so we commissioned one day, then we both went in the Air Force. Mary Ann served for 20 years. I served for 33 years. And after I retired, we decided Durham was a good place to come back to. And so we live right over in Durham, just south of South Point now, and are enjoying life here. So for all you Carolina fans, welcome. And I look forward to your questions and comments, as long as they're oriented on cybersecurity.
And let's not forget the state fans.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can tolerate them. So, but anyway, who was I? As I said, I was a general. I was a fighter pilot. Commanded the U.S. Air Force's largest combat wing. And a lot of times people want to know, what was your call sign, right? You must have had something cool like, Iceman or Killer or Maverick. And actually, this was me for my entire career. So actually, Eglin Air Force Base was my first assignment, and I got there about the time the movie ET came out. And as you might imagine, the more you don't want to be known as ET, the more likely you're to be known as ET for your entire career. So that was my call sign. It still is my call sign. There are people that still don't know my real first name. But when I retired, my wife had this painted for me. And just so you understand, that's ET from the neck up and me from the neck down. And so the other thing people want to know is, how did you go from being, a boring fighter pilot into being one of these guys, a really cool cyber guy? And I can tell you there's a pretty simple answer to that. This was my boss back then. This was at about 2010. And as everybody who's served in the military will attest, you get orders and not requests. And so I was finishing up my command at the wing the secretary mentioned in Okinawa, Japan. And my boss called me up and said, your new job is going to be working at the U.S. Pacific Command, and you're going to be working in IT and command and control systems and cybersecurity. And so your only option then is to say, yes, sir. And off I went to that task. And so last 5 years in the Air Force, I was working in a variety of roles around cybersecurity and those sorts of things, and then finished up, as he mentioned, as the Director of Operations at U.S. Cyber Command. And my last boss was General Alexander, who some of you heard yesterday, and we retired about the same time, and I joined him as a co-founder at IronNet. And so what I did was, as the Director of Operations at Cyber Command, as we mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders, and I was the COO of the company. I've also done a lot of keynote speaking and television stuff, and then I've also worked with a number of corporate boards talking about cyber risk. And it was really working with those boards that I really figured out, how do you talk about cyber risk? And that's an important term. I think cybersecurity is the technical aspect of it. Managing cyber risk is really the business aspect or the organizational aspect in the government. And it really is that strategic responsibility for the senior leaders in the organization to be managing cyber risk. And that's where I really started to develop a good understanding for, how do we need to talk about this in business terms, in strategic organizational terms. So if we were in a live audience, I would ask for a show of hands on how many people think this guy in the basement in the hoodie is the actual primary threat today. While these people are still around and they do this for kicks, this is not really who we're worried about today. Who we're worried about are people like this. And I realize this photo is a little grainy. I'm not sure we got it, but it's a bunch of people in the People's Liberation Army in China, and they're training to be cyber warfare officers. And whether you talk about criminal groups or you talk about nation state threats, this is who the threat is. They're well organized, they're well trained, they're well resourced, and they are doing serious business, right? They have a mission, whether it's a criminal mission or it's a national strategic mission, they have a mission. We are not fighting the guy in his basement in Paducah, Kentucky anymore. This is who we have to consider as the threat. And when I think about the threat kind of at the top level, I'd start with these nation state threats. China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, each one of them has different motivations. For China and Russia, clearly we could call them strategic competitors is the word we use a lot. China is still after a lot of intellectual property, espionage, particularly when you think about the work that goes on here in the Research Triangle. The thing that concerns me maybe most about China is the theft of medical data. It's clear, and by 2030, they want to have the market cornered on all of the data around, genes and DNA and pharmaceuticals, et cetera, and applying the artificial intelligence to interpreting that and be able to really be in control of that whole medical sector, if you can, to me is pretty scary. So for all the stuff that China is doing, when you really look long term, it's them having the upper hand on how we use all of that data to maintain public health and personal health and those sort of things. So clearly a threat, you understand. Russia, whether it's interference, with elections and misinformation, which continues to this day, it's working in our critical sectors, whether that's power or water. They are constantly looking for footholds in there. North Korea on the bottom left is mostly after the money. They're trying to figure out a way to deal with all these sanctions. And then Iran, cyber is their way to compete what we call asymmetrically. They can't compete with the U.S. in physical space, but they've demonstrated the will and the capability to attack the United States, as well as many of our partners and allies in cyberspace, going all the way back to 2012. Some of you who are in the business then may remember when they were attacking the financial services sector. And so when I think about those nation state threats, at the very top level, at the national level, I think what we have to think about is it's no more away games, right? As Americans, we're used to fighting away games, right? Take North Africa, we'll go fight in the South China Sea, those sorts of things. I guarantee you, if we get into anything serious with any of these countries, particularly with China and Russia, the first impact is going to be felt right at home. It's going to be in the ATMs. It's going to be in the water system. It's going to be in the hospitals. It's going to be in the electric grid. And frankly, Americans are not used to that, right? Take Netflix down for 2 hours, or 3 days ago, take Facebook down for 6 hours, and all the arm waving and all the consternation that goes on. If we took the power out to a city of 1 million people in Russia, Putin is not going to spend a lot of time worrying about how they feel about that, okay? And so really that kind of puts us at a strategic disadvantage. Our reliance on this internet and the technology, as well as kind of the culture of our country politically. And so that is something that concerns me when I look at this nation state threat very holistically, is that it really has given a way for all of these nations that would maybe choose to do us harm in the right situation, a way to get really at us very directly that they didn't have before. And then that picture on the right represents the organized criminals. And I don't mean the organized crime like the Sopranos, but I mean the same room that you saw of PLA operatives. There's rooms of people like that are conducting ransomware attacks, that are conducting theft of business data to be able to sell it, all sorts of criminal things. And again, these are very serious groups, and they are very well organized, and they all work together. And the last 2 points I think I would make to you about the threat is that they collaborate very well. When you look at those nation state threats, all 4 of those nations are known to have either explicit or maybe implicit coordination between state operatives, if you will, and what we would think of as criminal operatives. The lines there are very blurry. And so you will see a lot of the same tactics and techniques and operations happening in what appears to be a criminal sphere as you would with some type of a nation state attack. And then the other thing we see is that while I've got a little white space between these 2 threat groups, the fact is that space is getting closer together all the time. If I think back to my time at Cyber Command, things that were only nation state capabilities then are widely available for sale in the right place on the internet. And so as we think about how do we defend, as we're talking about today, our state agencies, how do we defend the critical business sectors in North Carolina, we can no longer rely on legacy ways of defending our enterprise networks. We have to be thinking about what is the next step, what is the technology I need to be thinking about, because frankly, we're still well behind the threat. As the secretary said, that's a common way and a very accurate way to describe it, where the bad guy only has to be successful 1 out of 1,000 times, and that poor CISO has to be effective 1,000 out of 1,000, or he's probably looking for another job, or she's looking for another job. And so we have to really consider that the nature of the threat is getting better a lot faster than we're getting better. And we're spending a lot of money on this. Gartner estimates this year we'll spend $150 billion on cybersecurity worldwide. And I would tell you that if you become the object of a targeted attack, I would say your chances of being hacked are 100%. Talk to anybody that's worked in the National Security Agency, and they will tell you that their success rate to get into a network they wanted to get into was 100%. And if you go back to my previous thought that a lot of those techniques and even the talent that does that type of work is available in the private sector, your chances of being hacked are 100%. And so when I say the object of a targeted attack, if somebody's decided they're going to get into your enterprise, they are going to get in. The question is, how prepared are you to deal with that? How quickly can you detect them? How quickly can you neutralize that threat? How quickly can you get your state agency back online? How quickly can you get your business online? How quickly can you restore confidence in the people that rely on you? But you have to assume that there's a 100% chance that they're going to be successful. And then when I say targeted, realize that especially with ransomware, a lot of the ways you become targeted is actually through a random search. There's ways that they can look across the internet essentially and find everybody that never applied that patch to their router, or is being sloppy with passwords, or being sloppy with the way they've configured the way they use AWS or Microsoft Azure. And then once they find those vulnerabilities, as I'll show you in a minute with our ransomware example here, they go in and go, do these people that I've been able to gain access to, do they have anything I'm interested in? And so you start by being just a random victim, but then you become targeted because they can see that they can make a profit in some way now that they've gotten into your network or they see a vulnerability. So let's talk a little more specifically now about ransomware. Some top level statistics worldwide. This is one estimate that ransomware will cost us about $20 billion, 57x jump from 2015. All that tells you is that the Willie Sutton effect is still works, right? The criminals are going where the money is. Ransomware is working, and they're able to make money from it. But it's kind of hard to look at that and go, okay, well, what does that mean to me? And so another study in the spring said the typical ransomware recovery cost reaches nearly $2 million. And what I would encourage you to think about is anytime you see these costs of a breach type of thing, I would argue they're always underestimated, because that $2 million probably represents, for the most part, what did it take to recover the data? What did it take to maybe get my computers up and running? It may cover some of those your lost revenue costs or downtime, but it's really hard to capture all of these intangibles, everything from reputation loss to the amount of time the organization had to devote that they should have been devoting to whatever their primary mission was. For commercial companies, a big one that is not really measured is increased oversight and regulation, right? Because as we've seen after every large hack, Congress, I think, frankly, does the right thing. There's got to be a mix of carrot and stick, but every time there's a major hack, we look at additional legislation, additional compliance requirements, those sorts of things. And, some of that makes you more secure. And frankly, some of it is just compliance. But at the end of the day, that's another hidden cost. So anytime you see costs like this, realize that this is really only part of what it costs your business or what it costs your organization in the event you get a hack. And then I'm assuming we've got a number of folks that are involved in small business. This statistic's a little outdated. It's a couple of years old, but it's pretty consistent. That these cyber attacks on small companies, $200,000 on average. And again, if I was in the room and asked all the small business owners that could absorb a $200,000 hit to please raise their hand, I don't think we would see a lot of hands up. So the bottom line is, this is serious business. If you're talking about a state agency that's providing a critical service, whether it's in healthcare or it's education or wherever it is, we can't afford the downtime that ransomware imposes on us. And if you're a business owner, you can't afford the downtime, and you can't afford the potential of just going out of business because you can't survive this attack. So it's important to understand a little bit about how these things happen. And so this is not the way it happens, okay? I don't just open my computer and one day it's encrypted, right? Like magic, out of the blue, I got whacked. That is not the way it happens. And so what I want to do is step you through a scenario on how ransomware occurs. And so for you business leaders that are not interested in technical stuff at all, I'm going to ask you to try to absorb a little of this because, again, back to my point at the beginning, you want to make the same educated risk-based decisions for your organization or your company around cybersecurity as you do any other strategic business issue, which means you need to have a little bit of background and you need to be conversant in it. And so that's why I want to step through a little bit about how these ransomware attacks occur and how you can protect yourself maybe a little better than you are today. So we a lot of times talk about something called the cyber kill chain. There's a set of steps in any hack if you will, that the attacker has to go through. They've got to get access into your network. Once they're into your network, there's a command and control. They've got to be able to communicate with whatever malware, whatever foothold they got in your network. They've got to be able to communicate in order to, go ahead and do what they need to do. They'll exfil some data. They'll bring some data out so they understand what company it is, what data can I get to credentials that I need, whatever it is. And then once they've figured that out, then the next step is typically lateral movement, because they've got that initial foothold in your network, and now they're going to move throughout that network. And once they've moved throughout that network and they've got a foothold in multiple places, then they can get to all the data they want. They can get to all of the credentials they need. And very importantly, it makes it very hard for even the most sophisticated companies to get them completely out, because they're everywhere and they've installed things that we call backdoors. So the good news is we've been talking about the cyber kill chain, and we've been developing a variety of techniques to break this chain for many years, because no matter what you're doing, you kind of have to follow this pattern if you're going to hack somebody. All right. And so the good news, if you will, is this is what they do with ransomware. So we know how to defeat this. It used to be 5 or 6 years ago, ransomware was more like the picture I showed you. Bing, I open up my computer, it's encrypted, right? And there's just about nothing I can do about it. Now, the attackers are much more sophisticated, right? They want to get in, they want to figure out what's data is in there, they want to get all of that data out, and they want to have a foothold throughout your environment. And once they do that, they've got multiple ways to hold you at ransom or to extort you, because they can hold your data for ransom, threaten to sell it. They can use the data for their own profit, and they can charge you to try to get it unencrypted. And so let's break that down just a little bit, and a couple slides to show you how this occurs using this cyber kill chain. So, this is what your environment looks like. This is a fighter pilot cartoon of a computer network. And it doesn't really matter whether it's in the cloud or it's in a data center you have, but you've got endpoints that access it, you've got servers, you've got data storage, you've got a thing called DNS, which is really important. It's how you access the internet. And you put all of these barriers around the outside. They're antivirus, they're firewalls, they're intrusion detection systems. There's user training, right? To train people not to click on links. But the bottom line, those well-meaning people on the bottom left, they're going to click on a link. They're going to go to a website they shouldn't go to. They're going to get co-opted by a very smart phishing attack, right? Because most of the phishing attacks, not most of them, but the ones that are successful are very sophisticated these days. And so now what happens is this guy's inside, he's gotten access, he moves laterally, he exfils the data, and he has what he wants, okay? And so what we have to understand is we may not be able to catch him at access, but how can we catch him at command and control? And if we miss him at command and control, how can we catch him at one of those subsequent steps? Because if we can break that chain somewhere, then we start to get to where we can stop this attack before that Bitcoin demand comes in. One of the ways we have to do this is we've got to look for unusual activity in the network. Because what these attackers do is now they get into this network and they use things that are normal in the network, normal communication protocols, or like we saw with Solarwinds, they use software that you trust. And so I've got to have a way to look at my network and say, something weird is going on. These two computers that normally talk to each other at 9:30 in the morning, why are they talking to each other at 11:30 at night? This computer that goes out to the Microsoft server for an update, why is it now communicating with some server in Russia? Maybe this person that normally accesses HR data, their credentials are now in our trading data or some other data that they wouldn't normally access. And so what we have to have is we've got to have a way of looking at our network. We've got to have an understanding of what is normal, and then we've got to identify what is abnormal. And the things that are abnormal are very subtle. And it takes some sophisticated algorithms and those sorts of things to determine when these subtly unusual things are going on. But if you're going to stop that ransomware attack, if you're going to break that chain, you have to have the ability to look at things like this and understand when abnormal things are going on. And I'll just mention for the technical people, yeah, I got it. This is a very a simple explanation. When you get down to the next level, it's looking at very technical things such as what's in the DNS header, what's the periodicity of the beaconing, et cetera, et cetera. But the concept here is, how do I understand when things I normally trust are being used in abnormal ways? And so here's a little cartoon of how this ransomware attacks and kind of bring all this together for you. But you've got this guy up here and he needs access, and he's going to get it through phishing. He's going to get it through a website. He's going to find a way, 100% chance if he really wants to get in, he's going to find a way to get access to at least one computer in your network. Okay. And then, like I said before, he needs to be able to command and control that computer. So he's going to put some malware on it, lets him communicate with that computer. He sees what data is on that computer. He sees what kind of credentials are on that computer, right? Because if maybe I got lucky, maybe I got to your system admin's computer and he has access or she has access to the whole network, and I've got those credentials, okay? And so now he's going to exfil some of that data. But you know what? He's not going to stop there, right? Because I'm only on one computer, right? That doesn't give me a lot of backups, and I've only got the data from one computer. What I really want is I want a foothold across this network. So I'm not going to encrypt just that one computer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move laterally. I'm going to find a way to go from that computer to all the other computers in the network. And there's a variety of ways they do that. Basically it's once they get credentials, particularly the credentials of the people that, not the average user, but the administrators who have access to the entire network. Once they do that, they can move literally within minutes to hours through most networks and have a very strong foothold. And now they see all of the data that's available. They exfil that data, and now they're ready to move to the next step and now actually encrypt it. So at this point, you're really kind of hosed, aren't you? Right? Because this guy has all of that important data. He can do whatever he wants with it. He can sell it. He can expose it. He can use it for his own profit. You can't access the data. You can't even run your organization anymore because all of these computers are locked up, and you are really in a bad spot now. And, for the Q&A, we can talk about some of the pluses and minuses and some of the considerations around paying the ransom. But when you get to this point, which is when most companies discover they've been the victims of this type of an attack, it really puts you in a square corner, and it's really hard to recover from this. The good news, again, is we know how to break this chain, right? This is the way we deal with all sorts, with basically any attack out there. And so again, I would leave you with this. If you want to be able to detect the breach before the ransom, you have to have a way to detect at all of these steps. How did they get access? What's command and control look like? Because they have to communicate out. When they exfil data, how can I find that out? Lateral movement. I'm not going to go through what's in black there. I put that up for the folks that are technical. You'll recognize some of those analytics and some of those anomaly detection things you need to be able to do to say something that I would normally accept in my network is not behaving like it normally does. And so I have got to have this capability in my enterprise. I've got to have this ability to detect those subtle anomalies if I'm going to stop any hack, no matter what it is, to include ransomware. Okay? So hopefully that wasn't too overwhelming, and it gave you, personally, it gives me a little more confidence, because again, we understand the kill chain, we understand how to break that kill chain, but we have to be able to execute across that. And so now I want to leave you with just 3 or 4 things that you might think about going back to your company. And these are basic things, but I always like to emphasize them. But if you do these things, you start to make yourself a very hard target. And that's really the secret. I don't have to run faster than the bear. I just got to run faster than Ron, right? And so make me a harder target. So the first thing I would encourage you to do is think about your critical data. What is it? And every company is different, right? It may be, where's my sales force? It may be your customer data. It may be some intellectual property. It may be, if you're a manufacturing or logistics company, it's what runs all of our systems, okay? But you've got to identify that. And then where is it? In the cloud or at the data center is not a very good answer, because everybody that's gone in and said, let me go figure out where my critical data is, invariably they find it's in more places than they originally thought, and there's more copies of it than they thought. And then who has access to it? Everybody that has access to it, do they need access to it? Are there people that have left the company or changed jobs that still have access to data that they don't need? you have to understand who has access to it, because when the green guy gets in there and finds credentials and sees that those credentials have access to this data, that's when things start to go really bad. Is it encrypted? Is it encrypted while it sits on my computer? Is it encrypted while it moves between my computer and the cloud or the data center? And then is it backed up? And this is what's really critical for ransomware, is it's not sufficient that it's just backed up. Is it backed up in a way where the green guy can't find the backup while he's moving laterally through your network, right? Because if you've got a backup and it's attached to the network and it's easy to find, then he's just going to get that data and encrypt that as well. And so you have to understand, how do I make sure that my backups are not accessible in the same way that the rest of the network is? And then the last thing a lot of people don't think about with backups is they don't practice recovering. They don't practice getting the agency or the business running again with that backed up data. Because if you think about it, that is some friction in the system, right? Because depending on how old the backup is, et cetera, you've got to be able to deal with that. So those questions on critical data, I think, are extremely important. User training. Whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, your work email, if you don't know what that link is, don't click on it. And we have to keep saying that, because this is still probably 70% of the ways that people get access to your network. Passwords and password keepers, there's a lot of these. Our company, for example, uses LastPass, right? Because we've got to have ways for people to, there's technology coming that'll get us beyond username and password. But in the meantime, having different passwords, unique passwords, the right level of complexity remains important. And the best way to keep track of those is with some kind of a password keeper. And hopefully most people are familiar with those. But whether it's your personal life or your business life, we should have a way to manage those passwords. And then two-factor authentication. 2 years ago, I would have to explain this, but now I don't generally have to explain it. The thing I still question is, why aren't people using it, right? Whether it's your personal life, I mean, any website you have, anything that has any of your personal data, financial data, almost everybody allows two-factor authentication. And at the business level, we still have people say, oh, that's too complicated, or that slows us down, or whatever. But two-factor authentication is one of the easiest ways to make yourself a hard target. It's not that they can't get past this, but you need to be able to implement this, and it's just got to be part of your routine. And then current and patch software, that's easy to say, but as anybody who's worked in the field tells you, it's not that easy. You've got to figure out a way to keep yourself as current as possible. You have to make a strategic decision about when you're going to invest in the latest software and when you can go ahead and live with something that maybe is a little older. And then a lot of times you get into a case where, especially with specialized software applications, that whoever you got that software has never upgraded it, right? And there's not a new version. And so you may have to continue to use that to keep your agency or business going, but you need to find a way to make sure that you can deal with the vulnerabilities that are associated with it. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is back to the national strategic level. And I'm sure General Alexander talked about this. I'll give it to you in my version very quickly, but in our country, in fact, every country really, we follow a failed strategy. Whether we're in the cloud or we're in a data center, we still trust too much, right? If somebody gets past that castle wall, we assume it's a good person. And we know that's not true. If the software is co-opted and it's inside the castle walls, you have a problem. And so you've got to have a way to understand what's going on inside. And then we can't continue to defend in isolation. We still tend to work even within the federal government. I don't know within North Carolina specifically, but certainly in the private sector, we work one company or one organization at a time. And that's not the way the bad guys work. They work together. And so we have to have a way to defend collectively. We've got to bring everybody's strengths together so we can fight that common enemy. Okay? So some things I'd ask you to keep in mind is, again, at that strategic level, those nation state threats, those are serious. Those are serious threats to our country, and we have to understand that. They're also serious threats to our government organizations at the state level, and they're serious threats to our business. You've got to understand a little bit about how these guys get in and what you can do to defend yourself. And I would just encourage you to talk to your security professionals and say, let's get the basics in place, but what should we be thinking about in order to detect some of these things that are a little more subtle and a little more dangerous? And then those things I gave you at the end, if you implement those, you still have a 100% chance of being hacked, but the odds of being able to deal with it are much better. Okay. So with that, I will go ahead and see if I can figure out how to stop sharing. Let's see here. I'll just close this.
All right. Brett, while you're doing that, I wanted to personally thank you and tell you how impressed I was that you were able to overcome your Duke education and deliver a clear and concise message on the importance of cybersecurity in our day-to-day lives.
All right, thank you.
We do have a couple of questions here. I want to start off with a question posed by Paul Russell. And he writes, we don't hear enough about disaster recovery's role in which we practice recovering. Will you please tell the audience or speak to the importance of disaster recovery exercises? And he writes, he concludes, thank you kindly.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point. I kind of alluded to that when I talked about, your critical data. What is it? Where is it? Who has access to it? Is it backed up? Right. And when I think about disaster recovery, I think about it in two ways. Like when I used to talk to boards, I would emphasize to them that, if you have a 100% chance of being hacked, then you need to prepare to be hacked, right? And you, as a company, you need to be ready for it. And at the top level, it is not about the technical recovery, right? It's about the business recovery, right? How do we deal with this? How do we communicate? What do we have to say to law enforcement? What do we not have to say? What should we say to our customers, our partners, the people that rely on us? All of those strategic business decisions need to be thought through and exercised. And so if your organization, when they do, what you've referred to as disaster recovery, if that's always just a technical exercise, figure out how to recover the data, re-image the machines, again, they're missing the boat, right? It's how is the company or the agency going to deal with this, recover it, and make sure that they can continue to do their mission or do their business. And certainly the technical portion of it's important, but the business has to understand what is it going to take us to deal with this and to be able to come out the other side. So thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Hey, Rob, can I add on to that? Because I think it's a great question, and the general is really hitting on that. There's business continuity and there's disaster recovery. To me, disaster recovery is the technical aspects that the general was just referring to, but we need to work with our business leadership for them to better understand what business continuity really means, and the fact that you can have events that are not disaster recovery related that will dramatically impact business continuity. I think just the example of a DDoS attack. We went through that in a previous life in another state, and it was amazing how the business, we'll put stuff on the internet. No. And they finally got to the point where we're going to have to call somebody. It was just getting them to start thinking about something as simple as a DDoS attack and how impactful that could be. We just saw that a week or two ago with a large carrier here in our state that impacted school districts and a bunch of others. From a disruption of telecommunication services. So great question. It's something that we're going to be focusing in on here at the state agency level because we're not where we need to be from a disaster recovery. And I'm not sure there's a correlation between business continuity and DR that needs to be there as well. So sorry for interrupting you, sir.
No, Mr. Secretary, I think the other point you had in there that's worth emphasizing is that, DDoS attacks are an example, the distributed denial of service attacks. They've been around forever, right? Just like phishing has been around forever. The fact is that most of the issues we have are not because of some very sophisticated malware. It's because there's simple stuff that continues to work, right? So we have got to be able to deal with things that just continue to work. And DDoS is a great example. But you're exactly right. That's a great way to convey that, business continuity versus disaster recovery, and how do the technical teams and the non-technical teams work together to make sure that the organization can keep running.
And even for our agency that is IT, we have to have a business continuity plan that's separate from disaster recovery, right? Our building's not available, but our data center still operates. That's business continuity. If our DR or if our data center is a sinking hole in the ground, that's a different event for us to have to address. And business continuity for us is probably less important, but we can have that discussion later. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, General Williams, thank you for that. We have a couple more questions in chat, and this particular one speaks to third and fourth party vendor risk management, specifically the Solarwinds hack. How do you properly vet software before it's purchased or installed to reduce risk?
Yeah, I've responded to this question quite a bit recently, and I've come to the conclusion that, you know, you aren't going to stand up a DevSecOps function within every company, right? The fact is, you have to trust the software to a certain extent, and CIOs for years, it's back to the patch thing. They understand that I'm not going to just download and install the latest version all the time because I don't know what it's going to break, right? Because my environment is so complex. And so I think now we have to start adding to that calculus on when do we upgrade the software is these security issues, right? And so we've got to start thinking about, okay, do I absolutely have to upgrade this, or do I have time to wait and see if any security issues appear? Because I don't think you're going to find the security issues, right? They're going to be found because somebody exploits something, et cetera. But the other thing I would say, Ron, is that whole issue of anomaly detection, behavioral detection. What they did with SolarWinds, without getting super technical, was in the command and control, they used a technique called DNS tunneling, right? So that there were what appeared to be normal requests for, everybody knows what DNS is, the domain name service. There appeared to be normal DNS communication, but embedded in part of that was this data that they were exfilling in the command and control they were doing, et cetera. And so, we detected that, for example, with the analytics we have. So that whole idea of you're going to have to probably install that software. The question is, do you have ways to understand when now something unusual is going on in the environment that I need to check out? And it may be DNS tunneling, it may be something else, but I don't think there's any way you can inspect the software. So.
Gotcha. Thank you for that response. I think that's on the minds of most of our state and local partners that have joined the call today. So I appreciate that response. I want to ask you, and this is a personal question of mine, why is it important for state and local governments to share threat intelligence information, and what role should the federal government and or the Department of Defense play in that model?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we've been working on. When we left the government, our view was that, back to that failed strategy, because I'll try not to tell too long a story, but the first issue I dealt with as the director of operations of Cyber Command was when the Iranians were attacking our financial services sector. And we had several things come out of that we have carried forward into our philosophy today, which is, number one, you've got to be able to see the whole attack surface, right? You can't just look at the soda straw view that you get out of each organization, because everybody's got a different view, everybody's got different sensors, et cetera. So step one with your question is, we have to work together so that we can build this. In the military, we would call it a common operational picture. What part of the threat do you see, Ron? What do I see attacking me? What do I see attacking here? What do I see attacking other sectors that may be coming to me? So I've got to be able